knowing the battle's won. For you've never failed me yet. Sing this with me. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Oh, you're still enough. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail. Promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never failed me yet. And I see you move the mountains, and I believe if I see you do it again, you made a way where there was no way, and I believe if I see you do it again, I see you move the mountains, and I believe if I see you do it again, you made a way where there was no way, and I believe if I see you do it again, and I see you do it
All right. So we are in like month 3 or something of this series about the life of David. And I think it's just so important to look at this man's life. This guy had so much written about him, more than any other person in the Bible, that God obviously wants us to see his life. And I wanted to spend a couple of weeks talking about relationships. I talked about relationships and the bad ones, because we all have bad ones in our lives, and then there's some good ones in our lives. And And honestly, some of the bad ones that David had were rough. Some of the good ones were great. And we know from experience, all of us, that relationships really matter. When your relationships are rocky, when things are not going well, when you got those dysfunctional ones going on in your life, boy, that just seems to be such a drain and so hard in life. And then when things are good, when the relationships are really thriving, it really makes life wonderful. I mean, those people in our lives that we love so much, the ones you can like live, laugh, love with or whatever, those people, that's what it's all about in life. And then there's the ones that can be tough. And those ones, maybe they make us stronger or whatever, but they're difficult. And David had both. David had Saul, who was the king. And we saw Saul's dysfunctional relationship with David a couple weeks ago. But David had Saul, and then David had Jonathan. Jonathan was that good relationship, that gift from God to him. But Saul was that guy. If you read in 1 Samuel chapter 19, I believe, Saul had a spear. He's the king, and he's hanging out, and he's sitting there, just enjoying his power with a spear in his hand. And David is singing songs for him because he's helping, he's worshiping, he's trying to help Saul out. And Saul is just filled with a spirit, an evil spirit, it says in 1 Samuel 19, verse 9. It says that he grabbed that spear and he tried hurling it at David. And David ducked out of the way, singing, "You got to be faster than me to get to me, but nobody's done it successfully." That's my Drake line for the day. I'm so hip. I am so in with culture. David ducks. He gets out of the way. And you might not have someone doing that in your life, specifically throwing spears or hurling them at you. But you might have people hurling insults at you regularly. People at home, people in the family, people at work. People just hurling stuff at you. And sometimes you got to duck the drama. Everyone say, duck the drama. Yeah, so you might not have someone trying to cut you with a spear, but maybe their words are cutting you, and it hurts. And you got to duck out of those relationships. And David did. He avoided Saul. He ran from him. He took off. But if life was just like that, that would be difficult. If you only have tough relationships, it makes that season of your life very tough. But thankfully, David had some good relationships too. Specifically, he had Jonathan. Jonathan was his boy. Jonathan died in a battle with Saul. God said it was going to happen, and David didn't have to, take things in his own hands like we talked about a couple weeks ago. God took care of that. And what it says as it ends Saul's life in 1 Chronicles is a little recap. It says, Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. See, when people are, maybe they're the people that are bringing the drama, or you don't have to get in there. You need to know that God is a very good judge. So you don't have to be. You can just stay away, and God will take care of it. And God takes care of it. Saul dies in a battle. It says that he didn't keep the word of the Lord, and he even consulted a medium for guidance instead of inquiring of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, his son, the son of Jesse. And so Saul died, and that was the end of his reign as a king, but Jonathan died too. He was his son because they were in battle together. And so you would think that David, who had been on the run 13 years, hiding from Saul, running in caves, and just ducking out for a long time, you'd think he'd celebrate. Because not only did his enemy, you would think he's his enemy, but he's not. Not only does this guy who's trying to kill him, gone, he's free, he doesn't have to hide out anymore. Not only that, but now he gets to be the king. He's the next one in line, next man up. It's David. And so David, becomes the king, and you would think that he'd celebrate, or maybe at least take a vacation because, he's been running for a long time. But David is cut from a different cloth. That's why I want to study his life. I want to be more like David, a man after God's own heart. David's cut from a different cloth. When Saul and Jonathan die in battle, he doesn't celebrate. He doesn't take a vacation. He doesn't get all excited. What he does is recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 2. It said David took up a lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan. And he ordered the people of Judah that they would be taught this lament and begin to sing it. And it's recorded, it says, in the book of Jasher. He says this, "A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen." And he goes on to talk about Saul and Jonathan. He's not bad-mouthing Saul. He's not dishonoring him. He's not saying he got what he has coming. David is a man of honor. He says this. He says, "Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired. In death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul." David honored people in his life even when he disagreed with them. He says, "People of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet, who adorned you in ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle." David takes this season where he's a king now. He's not running, but instead of having the character that we all kind of feel like we have sometimes, instead of celebrating, being like, Saul's gone, we're king, life is good, throw a party, he says, "Nation, listen, these guys have fallen, and we need to honor them." Because David knew the value of relationships. David knew how important relationships really are, and he honored them. The good ones, the bad ones. He knew that we only get one shot at life, and the people in our lives are gifts from God. And so David honored them, he mourned for them, and then he goes on to become the king. But David mourned for Saul because he honored him as a king, but David also mourned for Jonathan because that was his boy. That was his BFF. That was his, that was his brother. And he said that. He said, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You are very dear to me. How the mighty have fallen." David knew that this is a season of grief because he lost someone that was close to him. And that's not easy. He knew this one's going to hurt. He knew that his boy Jonathan, he probably won't find another one like that in his lifetime. And so he grieves. He says, "How the mighty have fallen." Because real good relationships are rare. And we got to figure out, how do we work these? How do we grow in them? How do we actually invest what's needed so that at the end of our lives we can look back and see some good relationships all along the way, because it's not happening today. Relationships are rare. Actually, in Robert Putnam's book, it's called Bowling Alone. He says the new American epidemic is loneliness. He says, never in the history of the world have people been able to communicate so much but be connected so little. Statistics show that less than 10% of all American men have not a true best friend relationship with another guy. And this isn't good. And I'm sure it's affecting women just the same. But when God created the world, he looked down, he said, "This is so good. Look how good this is. Look what I made here." And then he created man. He saw Adam alone. He said, "This one, that's not good. I need to make him a helpmate." It is not good that he is alone. It's not good when people live in loneliness. We might have a lot of followers on social media, but no real good friends. Or as the author of The Man in the Mirror said, he said, maybe you could find 6 people to carry your casket at the end of your life, but you might not be able to find one person to call at 2 in the morning when you need some help. And so that's just where we find ourselves today. But thankfully, David and Jonathan were the exception. And I could go on and on about relationships and how important they are. I could tell you statistics from studies about our health is better when we have good relationships, that we live longer because of good relationships. I could tell you that there's so much important things about relationships, but what really is the key is, like yesterday, I went to talk to a lady and pray with her on her deathbed, and what she wanted at that time in hospice, dying, was someone that could come and talk to her about God and her family, because that's what matters. When it comes to the end of our lives, the only thing that matters is our relationship with God and our relationship with others. And so that is so important that we get this right. And so what I'm terming this message is really not just finding good friends, but finding God friends. Tap your neighbor and say, "Hey, do you have any God friends?" Now, God friends are better than good friends. I'm going to show you why. God friends do things for each other, and they're gifts to one another that regular, just good friends don't do for one another. God friends are the ones that can be there for you, pray for you, help you, encourage you. God friends are something special and they're something rare. Jonathan and David had that, and I want to show you 4 things. I did a little acrostic today. It's special to me. It won't mean all that much to you, but it's special to me. I have 4 points as to what a good God friend looks like, and I want you to write down the 4 letters of the beginning of the words because it means something to me. So in your notes in front of you, you can write down S as the first thing that it takes to be a God friend, and that stands for sacrifice. What we see in the very beginning of David and Jonathan's relationship is sacrifice. When they meet, right after David kills Goliath, when they meet, Jonathan comes over to him, and it says that Jonathan actually gave him his robe, that they were one in spirit, that they were connected, they made a covenant with one another, and it says Jonathan loved him like he loved himself. Let me read it to you. It says, after David had finished talking to Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and didn't let him go home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant. Everyone say covenant. With David because he loved him as himself. And then did you ever hear that saying about a good friend, oh, he'll give you the shirt off his back? Well, that's what Jonathan did, but it wasn't the shirt off his back. It was the royal robe that he was wearing. He gave it to David along with his tunic, his sword, his bow, his belt. This guy saw something in David, and he said, me and this one are going to be boys. It was like real recognized real, and I'm going to show you how real Jonathan was in a minute. But they recognized something in one another, and they became instant God friends, and they made covenant, and Jonathan sacrificed for his new friend David. Not only did he sacrifice by taking the shirt off his back, but he sacrificed because when he gave him the royal robe, he was saying something so deep in that moment about this guy David. Because for 40 days, he watched his dad, the king of Israel, sit there while Goliath made fun of the people of God. And said, hey, come fight us, we'll fight you, you know. Send anyone out. And King Saul should have been the guy that went out and fought him. And so Jonathan, who's a warrior, I'm telling you, I'll show you in a minute, he's a warrior. He's watching his dad not go out and fight, and he's thinking, doesn't this man have any faith in God? And then he sees David step up and do it, and he gives him the royal robe because I think he was saying, this guy is royalty. This guy has faith in God. This guy is a leader I could follow. And so he hands over his robe. He sacrificed not just his clothes, but his potential throne because he's next in line. And that's what it takes to be God friends. You got to sacrifice sometimes for one another. You got to go get together when you don't feel like it. You got to spend some time with each other. You got to be there when someone needs you at 2 in the morning. That is what a God friend does. It's not just a good friend. Everyone say God friend. And that's what Jonathan was. Actually, his name means gift given by God. That's what Jonathan means. Jehovah has given, and he's a gift. So they connect. Jonathan sacrifices, and that's the first one. Everyone say S is sacrifice. And then that's what God friends do. Then the next one is an encourager. A-N, encourager. To be a God friend, you got to be an encourager. And I know I could use E, but it goes better with my acrostic to say and. So it's S-A, an encourager. Because here's the deal. When we have, you know, some friends on the playground when we're little kids, and we're just playing kickball, it's okay to have friends that are just funny. It's okay to have boys that you just play sports with and stuff. But when you get off the playground and you get into the battleground of life that we're in, you need some God friends who are encouragers as well. You need someone in your life that when you're down can come and say, hey, man, I know you're down, but I believe God's going to pull you through this. Hey, I saw you whip Goliath. And I know it doesn't look good now, but you're going to whip this thing too. I came to encourage you because you seem down. And God friends do that kind of thing. That's what Jonathan did. It was 1 Samuel 23. And David's on the run from Saul. And he finds out that David is going to be, Saul is going to try to kill David. So Jonathan, Saul's son, goes to his God friend. And he says, hey, David, it's true. My dad wants to kill you. The rumors are true. And somehow this strong man, David, the strong guy who fought, Goliath, this young boy who took on the giant, somehow just in that moment he found himself weak. And I just want to stop on that for a second, because sometimes we think just because we're Christian we have to be strong all the time. And here we have David, the one who one moment's fighting Goliath, but the next moment it says that David lost his strength, but Jonathan showed up and he encouraged him to find strength in the Lord. Jonathan showed up when David was down, and Jonathan steps in and he says, hey, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. I believe that God anointed you to be the next king, and you're going to get through this. And he encouraged him. It changed everything for David. And if you don't have that in your life, if you don't have a God friend in your life that when you're down can come and say, hey, I'm with you in this, then you're in trouble, because David would have been in trouble without Jonathan showing up. So S is for sacrifice, and they did that. They sacrificed for each other. A is an encourager. You need a friend who's going to be an encourager to you when you're down. And what happens, the secret is, none of us are strong enough all the time. So one day he might encourage you, the next day she might encourage you, or you might encourage her. It goes back and forth, but that's what God friends do, because sometimes we're strong and sometimes we're weak, but God friends encourage each other. So S, A, and then the last one is M. There's 4, but I'm going to give you the last one that's going to spell out my word, and that's M, and that's mission. They were on mission together, and that's what pulls God friends together. You know, I was talking about Alex in the first service, who gave his life to the Lord and just started really walking with God strong in February. And he's been doing so good, but he's a man on a mission, because he lives not far from here. And he says, hey, I can go up and clean the van. I can do this. He came up to me after the service today. He said, hey, if people need to talk late at night, I'll be a God friend. I work night shift. Tell them to call me. That's a man on a mission. And when you see someone like that, you're like, okay, this guy, he's the real deal. He's on a mission. And that's what Jonathan saw in David, because Jonathan was a man on a mission. See, before David killed Goliath, Jonathan killed 20 Philistines in a half an acre with his hands. Jonathan was a bad dude. He was a good friend, but he was a bad dude too. Jonathan, it was a time when Saul wouldn't fight again, and the Philistines are up on this cliff, and they're talking smack to the Hebrews, and Jonathan's down there, and at one point, he takes his armor bearer, and they sneak away from all the army of Israel. They sneak away, and he says, hey, let's go and fight these Philistines. He goes, God will save us. Whether it's 2 of us or 600, we're good if we have God. And he had faith to believe that God would deliver him. So Jonathan says, let's do it. And so Jonathan ends up climbing up the cliff, and the Bible says he killed 20 men in a half an acre. That's some Bruce Lee stuff. 20 men, half an acre, and you're fighting. And then it said his sword bearer came behind him and just put them out of their misery after Jonathan took care of business. So when he sees David kill Goliath, he says, this guy, he's a warrior too. I could be on a mission with a guy like that. And I could be on a mission with a guy like that steps up and says, I'll serve, I'll help. Who do you need help with? What can I do to serve? And that's what God has called God friends to, is a mission. We are on a mission from God. We're not the Blues Brothers on a mission from God. We're the Good News Brothers on a mission from God. And I think about people on a mission. I thought about Mark chapter 2. There's these 4 friends. They're God friends to this guy who's paralyzed. He's on a mat. They hear Jesus is in Capernaum. And so they said, we need to figure out a way to get our friend to see Jesus, because Jesus is a healer. And so what they do is they carry their friend, all 4 of them, on a mat, because these are God friends, and they know Jesus is what God friends do. And they take them, but the room is so packed they couldn't get their friend in there to see Jesus. So what they did, they climbed up on the roof, they ripped a hole in the roof, they lowered him down, and Jesus said that when he saw their faith, they healed him, that Jesus healed this guy. When he saw their faith. If it weren't for those 4, he never would have been there. If it weren't for those 4, he never would have got down there. And Jesus saw their faith. How did he see their faith? Because there was action with it. And God friends don't just have faith, but they take action too. And so the other day, I get a call to go to the hospital. And it's to go see this guy named Dan. I'm so ADHD, I just had to turn this mic off. What's that doing on? But anyways, I got a call to go see my boy Dan. Dan, stand up real quick, if you would, just so everyone sees how awesome you are. Everyone give Dan a hand. And Stevie, maybe you should stand up too. That's his wife, Stevie. And I don't know if your sister's here. Are they here? I didn't see them. So they're skipping. Tell them I told everyone they're skipping in the middle of church. But her sister goes here. And so anyways, I get a call. And it was kind of like, I did not want to get that text. But they asked me to go see Dan in the hospital. And the reason is because he was having some chest pains. And the reason I was like, I don't want to hear that is because it was about maybe a month or so ago that you had some God friends, Kelly and Bill, who texted me on a Saturday night, and they said, will you be at church tomorrow? I'd like for you to pray for my friend Dan. They just found a mass in his chest. And so I said, of course we'll be there. We'd love to pray for him. Just get him here. So they carry him in on a mat, and just like these four friends. And Big Dan comes up front, and, Kelly and Bill and Dan, they're some tough dudes, and they're up there, but you could tell God was working. And so 2 weeks later, I get a text that says, praise God, the mass is getting smaller. And then this week, I get a text that says, come to the hospital and pray for him. And so I'm like, I don't want to hear that. But when I get there, he was all smiles. I'm like, what is he smiling for? What's going on? Hey, tell me what happened. What's happening? He said, I was having some chest pain. He tells me the story. There was a blood clot in his lung. He said, yeah, but it's okay because the doctors confirmed that the mass is gone. It's gone. He said, they don't know how. They don't know what happened. I'm like, we know how. Jesus touched him because he had some God friends that brought him to church and brought him to Jesus, and God touched his life. He's like, I can get a blood thinner, clear this up, and today he's in church, and the mass is gone, people. Give the Lord a hand. But the doctors confirmed it. But that's the thing. That's what God friends do. They're on mission together, and when they have a friend who's hurting, they say, how can we get them to Jesus? Because that's the mission that they're on. That's God friends. So I said, I have 4 points for you to show you what a good God friend looks like, and it's S-A-M. And what you think it's going to be is like an E, because that's really the only word that works or letter that works to make it a word, but it's not. I wanted to end there because that's my boy, Sam. That was my like roadie when I grew up. I grew up in the village, single mom, poor family, all that stuff. You all know that. But Sam did too. And Sam and I grew up together, and Sam and I were boys. Our mission was sports, though, because him and I loved sports. We watched sports. We played sports. The only problem is I was 5 foot nothing, and he was 6 foot something. So he was like the stud, and I was like, just his, tag-along guy. But, in fact, this is embarrassing to tell you all, but I don't care. When we used to play Penn State linebacker in the house, what's up? That's Jamel. He's a Penn State linebacker. Sammy was really good at football, and Sam used to play football against me and another kid. We were both short. We'd play him out in the yard, and he'd have to play on his knees against two of us, and we'd still be scared he'd hit us. He was a stud. He was tough. But him and I were boys. And then he went to live with his dad out of town. I stayed in Johnstown. We kind of went our separate ways. We never really even saw each other anymore until like one time we partied together. We were both living totally wrong. We saw each other, and it wasn't a good night. But anyways, then we kind of went our separate ways. My life got worse, and I became a Christian. You guys know my story. Then Becky said she'd marry me, and so I was like thinking about my wedding, but now I'm all in for God. And I'm like, I got to figure out who's going to be beside me in my wedding. And I thought, well, I have all these friends, and they're all my boys and everything. And I was like, before I became a drug addict, before I became an alcoholic, before I became all that, when it was just good, clean fun, who was my boy? And I was like, Sam. That was my boy. And so I said, I'm going to go find Sam. I looked him up. I found him. We met at Ground Round. We had a great lunch, and I'm like telling him my story, and I'm like fired up for God. And I'm telling him my story, and he's just sitting there listening to me, and we're talking and talking, and I'm like, before I got into all the dark stuff, you were my boy. I want you to be with me, beside me as my best man in my wedding, because now I'm a Christian, and I want it to be about God. He's like, I'll do it. He bought me lunch. and I never saw him again for 10 years. And then next, 10 years later, I'm a pastor. I got 3 kids living on Sailor Street. And all of a sudden, one night, this big dude knocks on my door. And I open the door, and it's Sam and his mom. And he's strung out on drugs. He's a mess. And I said, come on in. And he spent the next week on my couch as I prayed for him and read scripture to him and helped him get his life back together, because the last letter is L, and it stands for loyalty. And that's what true friends have with one another. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you did. You're my boy. Get in here. You can stay on my couch. Let's figure this out. And when you find a friend that's like your boy, and you find somebody that you do life with, and you guys connect and you're on mission, you got to add that loyalty piece. That's what Jonathan added to the situation when he saw David, and it said they made covenant together. Most friendships today aren't in covenant relationship. Most friendships are like, well, if we do the same things together, and if we don't fight, and if this happens, that, and they don't have this deep covenant relationship going on. And David and Jonathan had that, and David was a man that was just cut from a different cloth. He was loyal to the end. So when they killed Saul and Jonathan in battle, they hung him up on the wall, and they were bragging that the king was dead, his son was dead. And David's first thing was he said, let's mourn, let's weep. They wrote that song, and then he sent soldiers, go get those bodies. And they honored them, and they buried them. But it didn't end there. So as Nick comes up, I want to tell you how this story plays out. Here's David, years and years later, who's just a man that had a God friend, that lost a God friend, and that thought about his friend often. See, many guys are lonely, like I said in some of the statistics, but I think David got to a place where he's towards the end of his life, and he's thinking to himself, like, God, you've been so good to me. Life's been really good, but, you know, I miss my boy Jonathan. Never found another one like him. That was my boy. And so he's sitting there, and he says to one of his servants, this is in 2 Samuel, he says to one of his servants, he says, hey, is there anybody that's still alive from the family of Saul? And the servant's probably like, uh-oh. King David is going to make sure he secures his throne. And the way you did that back in the day, you just killed any threats to the throne. And so if there was anyone from the lineage of Saul, they could come back and say, my dad was the first king of Israel. I'm supposed to be the next king. But what David did, because David was never a man like that. David was always a man of honor. It says that David said these words. He said, is there anybody whom I can show God's kindness to for Jonathan's sake? And my boy Sam, if he had a kid and something happened to him, I'd be like, hey, is there anyone I can help? Can I help in some way? I'll be there for him because I want to be loyal. And that's where David was. He's like, is there anyone from the family's lineage of Saul that I could show God's kindness to? And this guy named Ziba said, well, there is still this one guy. He's one of Jonathan's sons. His name's Mephibosheth, but he's crippled in both legs. And what the guy's saying is, there is still that one guy, but he's not a threat to your kingdom because he's hiding out in the desert. He's crippled. He's a lot of work, David. You don't have to worry about him. And David's like, no, go get him. Bring him to me. Because I want to show God's kindness to him, because that's the kind of friend he is. And it's amazing because what happens is Mephibosheth comes to David, this man with a heart after God, and he falls down on the ground, and he's like, where have you been at? And he's like, I'm living out in Lodabar, and it's this desert land. It's real, like, arid. There's nothing real fertile. He's been hiding. He's crippled. And that happened from when he was 5 months old. This little baby, the enemy was coming to attack him. One of his keepers picks him up to help, and she goes to run. She stumbles and drops the baby, 5 months old. He gets crippled in both his legs. Then his dad dies, his father, and then his grandfather Saul. And so he has to hide out for the rest of his life in this desert. And then he gets sent to the king. And he thinks the king's going to kill me because I'm Saul's descendant. And he falls on the ground, and he's like, where have you been? He's like, I've been out in Lodabar. He's like, listen, not anymore. listen, I'm the king. Me and your dad, we had something special that doesn't happen very often. I'm going to look out for you because of your dad. He said, from now on, you're living here. He said, you're living in Jerusalem. I'm going to give you back all the land your dad owned, and you're going to eat at my table regularly. No more starving, no more picking up scraps. I'm your dad's boy, and you're my family now. And I'm just thinking, what loyalty? And I see so many casual relationships, especially in the church. One of the biggest pains that I feel about the church today is this saying that I hear about, that we're the only group that shoots our wounded. And when someone's down, we pick on them, we talk about them. I mean, we don't gossip about them, we share prayer requests. I'll pray for Brother John. He's been cheating on his wife. Like you're passing drama on. Why you guys getting all awkward on me? Breathing and swallowing deeply like Nate when he gets caught lying. What's up, Nate? But that's what I hear. And then you hear of football teams and people in the military and gangs and different groups, and the loyalty and the brotherhood is so deep that they would die for one another. And then here we are at church, and some of us are wounded, and then we're not really there for each other. We need more men who are God friends. We need more women who are God friends with one another, because if David didn't have Jonathan, he might not have ever reached his destiny. And you might be just one friend away from reaching your destiny. But you got to be a good friend to have good friends. And so we all need to check our hearts, because Jesus was that friend. Jesus is actually the one who comes to us when we're fallen and broken and living in a desert place. And he comes and he says, no more. Now you're royalty. Now you eat at my table. And he covers our sins, just like David covered Mephibosheth because of their relationship. Would you stand to your feet? My goal today is pretty simple. I really want to start a revolution relationship-wise in our lives, in our church, just in our community. I want Christians to be known as honoring and loving and helpful and there for each other. Just like Bill and Kelly, they saw their friend, they said, hey, we got to get him to Jesus. Just like Alex when he said, I'm on mission with you. I'll help. What can I do to serve? I want to see more and more people like that so we can change this world together as God friends. Deal? All right, let's pray. Lord, I just thank you that you are the friend that sticks closer than a brother. That Jonathan had David and some of us don't have any, but I pray, Holy Spirit, you would start to stir up people. Start to lay people on one another's hearts, relationships that they can sacrifice for one another, encourage one another, be on mission together, and stay loyal to one another. That you would use that as a way to create God friends in one of our lives, in all of our lives, that we could change one another's destinies for eternity. And God, the only way that's going to happen is if you make us those kind of people. David had that because David was that. And I just pray you help us as your people. Help us to have hearts after you. Help us to be men and women of honor. And help us, Lord, to sacrifice for one another, to encourage one another, to be on mission with one another, and to stay loyal to one another. And people will see that we are yours by our love. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey guys, thanks so much for checking us out. If you want more information about Bridge to Life Church, check us out on the web anytime.